So that was a snippet of our Sunday review, which was Yo La Tengo's I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One, which was released by Matador in 1997, and on Sunday got a 9.7 in a review by Mark Hogan. A little bit of background: guitarist, vocalist Ira Kaplan and drummer vocalist Georgia Hubley formed Yo La Tengo as a couple back in 1984 and bonded over their mutual love for covering obscure indie pop gems. Though they soon began writing their own material, it wasn't until bassist James McNew joined in 1992 that Yo La Tengo found their own unique voice and became one of the definitive bands of 90s underground. I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One, the trio's 8th LP, is generally recognized as their masterpiece. Like most critics, Pitchfork praises the stylistic diversity here, as the band has no problem jumping between 60s style psychedelic pop, shoegaze, bossa nova, trip hop, krautrock, and a lot more. On top of that, most reviewers are highly complimentary of the loving and positive, yet occasionally melancholy sentiments of the lyrics here. As one reviewer put it, Yo La Tengo do for marriage what the Velvet Underground did for heroin. As a side note, 9.7 is the exact score Pitchfork awarded this album when it was first released 20 years ago.
Ooh.
So let's sort of recap our previous familiarity with Yo La Tengo. I don't think we've talked about them yet on this podcast.
No, I don't even think we've talked much about them in real life. I mean, I am criminally, shamefully educated in Yo La Tengo. I found a lot to love about that album. God, I don't even know when it came out, but it was called something like I Am Not Afraid of You and I Will Beat Your Ass. Yeah. I really, really enjoyed that, and it inspired me when that came out to go check out some of their other albums, and I found them all like quite long and overwhelming, and just never quite got into them. I mean, I've listened to this before, but I had no memory outside of the song Sugar Cube for some reason. But yeah, I mean, this is much to my shame. I know very little about Yo La Tengo. What about you?
Yeah, so I got into them, I think, in high school, probably. They were sort of one of those first, indie bands or whatever that you hear about, and I got into their album Summer Sun for a while. I actually saw them live during their I Am Not Afraid of You and I'll Beat Your Ass tour.
Oh. How was that?
It was really cool. Obviously it was quite a while ago, but I recall it being a very fun show. It was one of the small places in Orlando, Florida, that we've been to before, which is cool. But I've had this album in particular on my iPod in the past, and I've listened to it, but I never really adored it or obsessed over it or anything. Kind of found it long and overwhelming. That being said, I sort of left Yo La Tengo behind as it seemed like I just kind of grew out of it, never really revisited. So it was really interesting coming back to it this week. But how would you describe the sound of this album?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. I mean, I think that, I don't know, part of the reason we've never talked about Yo La Tengo, I think a lot of people don't talk about Yo La Tengo. They're like the unsung heroes of, definitive 90s indie bands, I think. I mean, they have an unassuming style, which I think we'll talk more about. But I mean, on a pure genre level, sound level, I mean, this to me sounds almost like a perfect 50-50 cross between, let's say, Slow Dive and Apples in Stereo. Okay, so it's like there's a lush noise pop, dream pop quality to a lot of this. And yet a kind of playful, fun 60s pop thing that you might find in something like Apples in Stereo. Lovely sunshiny melodies and things like that. Sort of a goofball playfulness about it, right? So instead of getting real serious with it, like Slow Dive might, okay, you add these lush soundscapes, almost these shoegazy noise poppy soundscapes to something that's just kind of just fun and sweet. I think there's more covered here. A lot of genre, they dip into genres here and there. But what would you add to the overall sound?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's definitely a lot of genre hopping, a lot of blending of genres, and that's sort of something I've always thought about when it came to Yo La Tengo, that they just seem to be a melting pot of a lot of different forms, and I think that a lot of that comes into the fact that they have multiple lead singers. You know what I mean? They'll have a male voice leading the way on a song, and then they'll have a female voice obviously leading other songs, and I always found that, just personally, on a personal level, just very fascinating, very inspiring as when we were kind of doing music back in those days. I I loved that aspect of them, that there was no boundary. You know what I mean? They could try anything. I like that. And I think they try a lot of things here. You know, it's a long album, so there's a lot of territory. I feel like they cover. A song like Sugar Cube is sort of just one example, but they, even in there, you know, they have those 60s harmonies in there, as well as like a very shoegazy sound. You know,
absolutely.
The sound of that song is extremely, like, right out of the Slow Dive playbook, kind of like what you were mentioning before.
Yeah, I mean, and then also, like, you know, the song before that, Moby Octopad, right, is like, there are a lot of songs like this where if Sugar Cube is like a perfect pop jam or something, you know, Moby Octopad is like very repetitive. It's almost like a looping bass line, you know, sort of bass driven thing. It's still got this dreamy, slow divey kind of noise poppy thing, and yet it's not like these bright, summery hooks like something like Sugar Cube is. It's got a repetitiveness to it that, you know, it almost reminds me of, like, we talked about Stereolab before. I think that sort of comes to the fore sometimes in some of these like more repetitive, almost like electronic grooves that we'll occasionally get blended, you know, very delicately blended into like this kind of shoegazy noise pop sound. We get some like bossa nova stuff. We get a track like Green Arrow, right, which is interesting that it's like sort of like a lead like slide guitar thing, right, like little instrumentals like that are just sort of sweet, lovely little. They seem disposable, but they actually are like given a place of prominence here, right? So you take, like, you know, you might think of like the instrumentals on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, right? Like, Let's Go Away for a While. It's like that, and yet not a like a lovely pocket symphony or something like that. It's more like just a sweet little idea that, you know, they just kind of play with. Or we get like 1 p.m. again, the song after that, which is like quite country-ish, okay, which they dip in effortlessly. We get some of these bossa nova things that they dip in effortlessly. We get this song Spec Bebop, which is like 10 minutes long, and it's literally just an instrumental krautrock jam, which is, by the way, fucking awesome. But do you feel like this is all hanging together, or does it feel a bit disjointed?
Surprisingly, I kind of felt like it hangs together fairly well. Like, and I'm glad you kind of mentioned these instrumental tracks, because I really felt like they were just really welcomed, lovely little pieces that sort of came in to sort of just continue this like meditation through all of these songs. You know what I mean? Like, it just felt, it was just a welcome relief, or maybe a release, I should say, of all the, you know, everything that's like kind of built up around some of these other songs. You know what I mean? It just made the album very enjoyable, I guess. Like, it was like exploring. That's what it felt like.
Yes,
you know?
Yes.
It really felt like they were just taking you on a journey, or like they were just exploring different genres and stuff. And here you have a lovely little instrumental idea, like he had mentioned, and then this 10-minute epic out of nowhere. But you never feel tired of it. Like, I kind of just felt like I loved every minute of it. How did you feel?
Yeah, so I mean, I feel pretty strongly that there is a randomness to the sequencing here. There is to me no discernible rhyme or reason why any song comes before any other song here. I mean, it just seems like a huge batch of these little experiments, these little journeys that they take you on. And it doesn't, you know, it still works. I think it just makes it a challenging thing to get into. I mean, I found this hard to pick apart at first. Did you kind of feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's no doubt like so overwhelming that I feel like the first couple of listens, I was really only maybe hearing the first 8 songs, you know what I mean, before I could start to pick up the second half more.
But I think it complements what this album is about, like the spirit of this album, which is that kind of like playful, you know, experimentation, trying new things. You know, some songs are like very minimal, like obvious highlight, Autumn Sweater, is almost like Latin tinged kind of percussive beat, and then it's almost driven like entirely by like a lone organ or something, and like kind of a whispery soft vocal line. And you know, it's like such a, you know, what's amazing about this record, right, is that there's so many things about it that could feel light and insubstantial, and yet it, as a whole, it has like a weight to it. You know, remember we were talking about Moses Sumney, right? And I thought that, you know, it was a really nice album, but since so much of it was skits and a lot of the best songs were actually like very, very short, I mean, there was just sort of like a insubstantial quality here. Now, maybe Yo La Tengo just avoids that because it's so long, and as a whole, the whole thing is like feels like a big grand statement. But I mean, even these light, sweet moments shine the way that like the light, sweet moments on the Beatles' White Album do, you know?
Right, and I think what's something I've always admired about them, and they do this on other albums. I mean, Summer Sun is pretty long, and so was that Beat Your Ass album, or whatever. I can't say the whole name of it is. It just it just seems to be a characteristic of this band. Sure. And I just admired that a lot. Seeing them live also, like I feel like I could just watch them play this entire album live and it would be great, because there's enough here to just keep things interesting throughout, and when you go to shows, when you go, and you see concerts, bands often play songs obviously from multiple albums, and you get like this whole kind of conglomeration of their whole catalog. But like in a lot of ways, I feel like you get that right here in these 16 tracks. You get all of Yo La Tengo right here. If you didn't listen to anything else, it really would be okay, because this is them,
Yeah, absolutely. And, on that note, before I forget, we get a couple covers here as well. We get like the Beach Boys' Little Honda, okay? And we get like an Anita Baker song at the end, My Little Corner of the World. And, they fit in seamlessly to the program here. And yet that could easily, it's hard to put a cover on your own album, because especially like a lighthearted kind of like Beach Boys deep cut like that, right? Mm-hmm. But it's, just is the spirit. It captures the spirit of this album, right? It doesn't make it feel light and insubstantial and tossed off and poorly planned. I have this theory, right? And I think we've talked about this before, that basically indie of the 90s was like the second punk movement, because it was so inspiring. And you were sort of talking about, being inspired as a musician listening to this when you were young, right? I mean, it was so inspiring to hear simple little songs like this and realize like, hey, that's all a song has to be, is like a little idea, And if you listen to something like that instrumental track on here, Green Arrow, it is like gorgeous in its simplicity. And you might think, God, how could I ever write something like, the Beach Boys' Let's Go Away for a While, an instrumental from Pet Sounds, right? Which is like so orchestrated and so brilliant and so complicated, right?
Right.
You might listen to this and be like, I don't even have to. I just have to find a sweet little melody, and I can make a little track out of it. And then I can make 100 more tracks just out of little sweet melodies, little simple ideas. And that was like the whole spirit of the indie of the 90s, I think. That made it so liberating for people like us, Right.
Like, you don't have to necessarily be an amazing singer like Brian Wilson or the Beach Boys, or, you can literally be almost inaudible, and it's okay as long as the melody comes across, you know what I mean? And like, that's awesome. You know what I mean? And these guys, they don't sound like amateurs, you know what I mean? They are obviously very talented song craftsmen, craftswomen, whatever. Right. But they understand that, like, hey, a simple melody can really be very, very meaningful. One of my favorite songs from them is called Take Care. It's the last song on Summer Sun, and it is just like a very, very basic acoustic guitar and what's her name? Georgia Hubley's voice, her vocal, and it's just lovely, and it's so simple. There's nothing more to it. You don't need to throw an orchestra over it or give me a power ballad or anything to elicit the sort of emotions that you get just from a very, very simple song.
Yeah, that is so inspiring to me. I mean, I think it's inspiring to anybody that hears this, and I think that's kind of why this is the classic that it is. I mean, so many highlights here. I don't know if it's worth, I don't even know if I could pick a best or worst song. I mean, I think Autumn Sweater is a lot of people's favorites. I mean, I think Sugar Cube as well. These are two of like the most lovely, like almost fully crafted pop songs, even though they're just built around a very simple idea. But I also love the kind of like half ideas that they just roll with. I mean, the song Shadows, I think Pitchfork's review talks about this, but it could almost be a segment from a talk song from like Laughingstock, where it's like almost a drone, and yet they've turned it into like this lighthearted, sweet melody thing. I mean, instrumentally, I think that's very interesting. But I mean, I love Spec Bebop. I already mentioned that. I mean, that's fucking cool that all of a sudden they're going to do a 10-minute like jam, which just goes and goes. I don't know. You listen to almost any song here and you just feel like you want to get some friends together and, write music all night and just see what you can create,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the reason why I adored listening to this and look forward to continuing to listen to it. I'm kind of, ashamed that I wasn't listening to it as much back in the day. It was the other albums that I was really checking out more of. But this, I can understand why this is considered their masterpiece.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I feel like I need to I need to listen to more Yo La Tengo. Now the score, 9.7. I mean, that's very high. I feel like it was an intentional nod. So often Pitchfork gets shit for changing scores later on, and that original review of this album from 1997 is actually archived, deleted. It's no longer available. But they gave it the same exact score. A lot of people found like early Pitchfork kind of silly for handing out things like 9.7. They would hand out 9.9, and it's like,
right.
Well, what the fuck? How is that 0.1 away from being perfect? But I mean, do you like a 9.7? You think it's a silly score? Are you willing to call it like a 10 classic, or you got to listen to it more, or where are you at?
I hesitate to give it, a perfect 10, and that's probably because, in all fairness, I haven't listened to it enough. You know what I mean? And it's a long album. There's a lot to get through for sure. I'm tempted to do it because I do, I have loved, Yo La Tengo in the past, but I mean, I would say something around like a 9, maybe even a 9.5. I mean, that's, it's that quality just upon the first couple of listens, I would say.
Yeah. I think, I guess I could agree with a 9.7, but, if it was just going to be pure gut, I might do like a 9.4, 9.5. But I think it's almost certainly worth your time if you've not heard it before. Agreed?
Absolutely.